Cuando piensas en esto, la paz y la completitud son casi anónimas. Cuando las personas pierden la conciencia de su completitud en sus relaciones, en sus conexiones amistosas, es muy probable, es posible que entren a la guerra. Esta integridad es lo que les da paz. Y cuando se pierde esta integridad, esta completitud, es mucho más posible que entren en guerra, ya sea la guerra abierta, guerras de tanques, aviones, o la encubierta, como guerras económicas o de negocios, pero las personas que están completas o que están conectadas con la unidad no se involucran en la guerra. Como vemos, la completitud y la paz son esencialmente sinónimos. La integridad y la paz, el estar completo y la paz son sinónimos. Y hay muchos tipos diferentes de integridad. Voy a nombrar algunas. Integridad política, integridad racial, integridad ecológica, integridad histórica, sociológica, fisiológica, psicológica, emocional, médica, religiosa, moral, de negocios, de economía, tecnológica, nacional, internacional. Todos estos son clases de integridad, integralidad que pueden ser logradas, pero lo que no están bien conocido es que todos estos tipos de integridad o integralidad dependen de que los seres humanos primero se vuelvan íntegros, porque todo esto depende de que los seres humanos alcancen diferentes particularidades, clases de integridad, que con frecuencia son conocidas como crecer, despertar, abrir, limpiar y mostrarse para poder ver lo que está involucrado en este proceso de aumentar la integridad. Permítanme repasar cada uno de manera muy breve. Entonces, podemos ver, para que podamos ver lo que cada uno de estos significa. Empecemos con despertar. Muchos de ustedes están familiarizados con el despertar. Es un estado de unicidad que se encuentra con cosas como la iluminación, los despertares, los satoris o simplemente despertarse. Quiere decir despertar a una unidad completa con el cosmos completo. A veces se le llama la conciencia cósmica. Ya no ves las estrellas, sino que eres las estrellas. Ya no sientes la tierra, sino que eres la tierra. Ya no ves el sol, sino que eres el sol. El Zen llama a esto un satori, que quiere decir despertar, porque estás despierto a tu absoluta unicidad con todo. El hinduismo lo llama moksha, que quiere decir la completa libertad, porque eres uno con todas las cosas. No hay nada afuera de ti que te pueda hacer daño, limitarte o constreñirte. Estás completamente libre. Los místicos cristianos lo llaman la conciencia de crística porque eres uno con el Cristo, eres uno con todo. Despertar, obviamente, es una gran integralidad, una gran integridad, pero de manera interesante no es la suma total de toda la mística, de todo lo que los seres humanos tienen disponibles para ellos. Para ver por qué, miremos el crecer. Cuando el ser humano nace, no tiene todas sus capacidades plenamente desarrolladas y funcionales. No puede hablar, no puede hacer matemática, difícilmente puede caminar, pero en el transcurso de los años, mientras va creciendo, va a ir agregando todas estas cosas y toma tiempo poder ver las perspectivas. Toma un joven y una bola que es verde por una parte y roja por el otro lado. Pone esa pelota entre tú y el niño y hazla girar varias veces para que el niño pueda ver con claridad que por un lado es verde y por el otro lado es roja. Luego ubica el lado rojo hacia el niño y el lado verde hacia ti. Y pregúntale al niño qué color ves. Y el niño va a decir rojo. Luego pregúntale al niño qué color estoy viendo yo y el niño va a decir rojo. No puede entender que puedes ver por una perspectiva distinta a la tuya. Mentalmente no puede asumir tu punto de vista. No puede ver una perspectiva distinta a la propia. Espera unos años más adelante y repite el experimento. En esta ocasión el niño ya lo va a ver bien Y cuando le preguntes qué color está viendo, va a decir rojo. Cuando le preguntes qué color estás viendo tú, va a decir verde. Entonces ya ha atravesado un proceso de crecimiento que ahora puede tomar perspectivas y se puede poner en tus zapatos y reconocer que tú estás viendo el mundo de una manera distinta. Lo ve en una perspectiva distinta. Las perspectivas adicionales en el proceso de crecimiento aumentan la integridad del mundo que podemos ver. Eh, y hay diferentes estadios de crecimiento, 12 estadios desde el etnocentrismo, cada uno de esos estadios nos presenta una mayor integralidad desde la cual vemos el mundo. Y esto mismo pasa en el proceso de abrirse. Abrirse se refiere al hecho de que los seres humanos no solamente tienen una inteligencia, como la inteligencia cognitiva, sino diferentes inteligencias. Inteligencia cognitiva, emocional, moral, estética, etcétera. Al punto en el cual nos abramos a todas esas inteligencias, vemos una mucho mayor integralidad en el mundo alrededor nuestro, y esto es abrirnos. Entonces, ahora, ¿qué pasa con el limpiar? Eso generalmente bien se devuelve a Carl Jung y otros psicólogos, partiendo del trabajo de Freud. Muchos conocen el trabajo de Freud porque han oído el trabajo, los conceptos de ego e id, siendo el ego la parte consciente y racional de la mente y el id la parte animalista e instintiva. Pero la mayor parte de las personas no saben que Freud nunca utilizó ninguno de esos dos términos. Él nunca utilizó el término ego o el id. Esos son términos latinos que fueron agregados por sus traductores, porque su traductor pensaba que Freud tenía que sonar más científico, pero Freud en sí mismo utilizaba el yo y el ello. eh, y no puede decir que el id le va a dar problemas al ego, sino que él literalmente decía el ello le puede dar al yo muchos problemas. Y él hablaba de esa manera, basada en el alemán. Entonces, la cita más famosa de Freud, cuando él se le preguntó, ¿cuál es qué es lo que hace tu psicoanálisis? Tu nuevos, novedosos psicoanálisis. Y entonces, él respondía en esos términos.
Translated that way. What he really said was, where it was, there I shall become. What he meant by that was the process of cleaning up. For Freud discovered that the mind can repress and seal off various aspects of itself. And these repressed aspects become part of the id or the it. Once in the id, they are often projected onto other people or things, onto third persons. He, she, they, them, or simply it or its. So a part of me, of I, becomes a he or she or simply an it. My mind is split and out goes the unwanted part, the id, often called the shadow. So the fractured and reduced mind, often called the persona, becomes much less than the full mind or the whole and healthy ego mind. My mind is diminished to a smaller persona by repressing and throwing out the shadow elements. So the cure is to take back the shadow or it and reunite that with the small persona to give a whole and healthy mind. And that is what Freud meant when he said, where it was, there I shall become. Join the it and the I to produce a whole and healthy mind. This is obviously a move in the direction of increased wholeness. The wholeness of the mind is being taken back from a fractured, repressed, broken mind or persona And this is done by reintegrating the split off shadow or it material. And that is what psychoanalysis or cleaning up was meant to do, to reunite the split and repressed areas of the persona with their shadow elements to produce a whole and healthy mind. This is a holistic process if ever there was one. Almost everyone can use some sort of therapy similar to psychoanalysis, since we all have some degree of repression and split-mindedness. We all have shadow elements which we project onto other people or things. If I project my lust onto another person, I don't have any lust. After all, I projected all of mine. But the person I projected it onto seems loaded with it. All they want to do is have sex with me, and they won't let up. The only cure for this is for me to take back my projection. Where it was, there I shall become. But we all have projections like these, and increasing the wholeness of the mind by taking back shadow elements is the only cure. For our wholeness inventory, this leaves showing up. Showing up refers to what are called the quadrants in integral meta theory. And quadrants refer to 4 major dimension perspectives that all things in the universe have. By things, we mean holons. And a holon is a whole that is made of other wholes. The whole of one thing becomes a part of the whole of another thing. It's a whole part. All things in the universe are made of holons. So whole quarks come together to form parts of subatomic particles like protons and neutrons, which are wholes that become parts of atoms, and whole atoms become parts of whole molecules, and whole molecules become parts of whole cells, and whole cells become whole parts of the entire tree of life. Whole planets become parts of whole solar systems, which become parts of whole galaxies, which becomes parts of whole universes. Whole letters become parts of whole words, and whole words become parts of whole sentences, and whole sentences become parts of whole paragraphs, and so on. There isn't anything in the entire universe that is not a holon. And each holon has at least 4 dimensions. It has an inside and an outside, and it exists in both singular and plural, or individual and group forms. And each of these dimensions has very specific characteristics. We call them the 4 quadrants. The upper left quadrant, the interior of any individual holon, has consciousness. The simplest form of consciousness is what Whitehead called prehension. And he maintained that even atoms and quarks have prehension. Prehension means to touch or to feel, and simple touch is the lowest form of consciousness. Prehension will become more complex the more that consciousness evolves, moving from prehension in its simplest form, found in non-living material things like atoms and molecules, moving to irritability in the earliest single cell living things like bacteria. Irritability means that if you poke a living organism like a bacteria, it will move. It shows irritability, a form of consciousness. From there, it moves to instincts and emotions in animals, to a cortex in higher animals, to thinking and rationality in humans. And it can continue to grow and evolve with spiritual practice, all the way up to cosmic consciousness. So the upper left quadrant is subjective consciousness, and all holons possess an upper left to some degree, even the prehension of quarks and atoms. They are all first person singular, I, me, mine. When numerous subjective consciousnesses come together in the lower left, the result is an inner subjective event called culture. Culture consists of all the combined work of all the consciousnesses or all of the minds of everybody living in that culture. It's medicine, it's arts, it's history, it's literature, it's work habits and products. All of those are what we call culture. They're the plural form of the upper left quadrant. And also include you or thou. That is the result of what people's minds do when they work together. They work with a you or a thou. So consciousness marks the two left-hand quadrants. Upper left is singular or individual, and lower left is plural or group or culture. These two left-hand quadrants that contain some form of consciousness are in sharp contrast to the right-hand quadrants, which are all the exterior or outer material forms of holons. So in the upper right quadrant or material form of individual holons, we have in order quarks, subatomic particles, atoms, molecules, multiple celled plants and animals, all the way up the tree of life, culminating in human beings with their material brains. So brains are material. You can actually see them. They're the size of a crumpled grapefruit, and therefore they're in the upper right, while minds are consciousness and are therefore in the upper left. The material upper right, in other words, are all third person singular, he, she, or it. As you might have noticed, the upper quadrants all contain singular or individual holons, and the lower quadrants all contain plural or group holons. So where the upper right quadrant contains individual human beings, the the lower right quadrant contains their group forms. According to Linsky, this means that this contains the group forms moving technologically from foraging to horticultural to agrarian to industrial to informational. Those are the material forms of human collectives, the technological forms. They are all third person plural, they, them, or it's, oftentimes because both of the right-hand quadrants, the exterior or material quadrants in both singular and plural forms, are both made of matter. They're often treated as one domain. In other words, there's the upper left quadrant, the lower left quadrant, and then the two right-hand quadrants are often treated as one, namely the material world, whether it's singular individual things or collective things like technological forms or buildings or other artifacts like that. If so, then we refer to the quadrants as the big three. So you might want to keep that in mind. These four quadrants are so ever present because they represent the two most common opposites in the language, singular versus plural, and inside versus outside. Singular, remember, are the upper quadrants, and plural are the lower quadrants. And inside are the left-hand quadrants with consciousness, and outside are the right-hand quadrants with material forms. Because of this, they are the foundations for numerous other categorizations. They are the good, the true, and the beautiful. They're Habermas's three validity planes. They're Kant's monumental three-volume work, often said to be the greatest work in Western philosophy, namely the Critique of Pure Reason, the critique of morals or practical reason, and the critique of art. Most importantly, the quadrants form the basis of the three major perspectives found the world over in all of its languages. The upper left quadrant is first person singular, I, me, mine. The lower left quadrant is the second person, you, singular, and you skies or you all, plural, which combined with first person plural, an I, is a we. The right-hand quadrants, on the other hand, are the material quadrants. And thus, in addition to human pronouns, he, she, they, them, etc., they include the third person singular or it and plural or its. So the four quadrants are I, you, we, it, and its. As I say, these pronouns are found all over the world. And the fact that they are based on the four quadrants, or the big three, tells us just how widespread and how important the quadrants are indeed. Now let's return to the various types of wholeness that I listed and indicate how they depend upon the growth of wholeness in human beings themselves. We can start with growing up. I mentioned that there are up to a dozen various growing up stages, and they are given dozens, even hundreds of different names. For example, the genius Jean Gebser labeled them the archaic stage, the magic stage, the mythic stage, the rational stage, the pluralistic stage, and the integral stage. We were talking about warfare, and one of the items that we notice is that, with few exceptions, the rate of warfare goes down with each of those higher stages of growing up. Using Lenski's data, warfare got off to a slow start, mostly because foraging tribes, early magic, didn't run into each other that often. Only 27% of them engaged in warfare. That's still quite a bit to start with. 27% of tribes got in warfare. But as soon as the next stage, horticultural or early farming, advanced magic, was up and running, the percentage of tribes that engaged in common warfare rocketed from 27% to 55%. Then growing up started to kick in, beginning the long holistic project of increasing wholeness and therefore decreasing warfare. With agrarian mythic, the percent of tribes that engaged in warfare dropped from 55% to 48%. As growing up moved into advanced agrarian, late mythic stages, it dropped again to 37%. It kept going down from there. By the time the advanced rational industrial age emerged, it had dropped significantly. Warfare was rare or completely absent in a full 83% of countries. That meant warfare was occurring in only 17%. Of course, the 20th century was something of an anomaly, with more people killed in warfare than in all previous ages combined. Of course, this was helped by the discovery of new and incredibly powerful weapons, the hydrogen bomb for one. And one could point out that Europe itself was one of the most fractured states it had ever been in. There was very little wholeness in Europe at that time, with its various states all in turmoil. It was this glaring lack of wholeness that, after both wars, World War I and World War II, made Europe attempt to create a whole body. That is, to bring Europe together to create a holistic governance system that would pull all of the European nations together into one body. The European Union is the result, and they drew it together because they knew that wholeness and peace are synonymous. And if they wanted peace, they had better get wholeness. So far, this European has worked perfectly to avoid warfare. You see the same thing with slavery. Slavery got its start during the advanced horticultural period, where a stunning 83% of societies had slavery. Slavery was basically ever present worldwide. Then growing up started to kick in. And by the very next stage, the agrarian or late mythic times, that percentage had fallen precipitously to 45%. It was at this time that the cognitive and moral multiple intelligences had jumped to the universal formal operational stage of growing up. And so it was increasingly believed that slavery itself was immoral. And so an abolition movement was set in place. And the fact that growing up had reached that stage marked the first time in history that slavery was considered immoral. I mean, even Aristotle didn't think slavery was immoral. He thought it was just a natural state of affairs. So we can see how growing up caused a decrease in slavery. The result, among many, was the Civil War in America, where close to 1 million people gave their lives to put an end to slavery. Thus, all in all, when growing up reached the rational stage, slavery was ended in every rational industrial society on the face of the planet. There is still slavery existing today, by the way, but only in the parts of the world that have not grown up to the rational industrial stage of growing up, which simply highlights my point. So the point here is that every one of those areas of wholeness that I listed at the beginning of this talk, every one of them can reach a full wholeness, but only if human beings have themselves grown up to at least a rational stage of development. Lacking that, they will have no idea how to get to wholeness, or how to use wholeness, or how to create wholeness. Wholeness simply slips away, and we regress to one form of warfare or another, covert or overt. So the question becomes, what can we do now to help people become whole? What techniques, what tools, what practices can possibly help people to grow up into a full wholeness? I have one idea that I think would work best, and that is education. But it has to be carried out very carefully. Basically, we want education to become more integral. And that means we have to get integral into the educational system, which is not an easy task. But there's already one system based on one stage of growing up, namely just the green, pluralistic, multicultural stage, and it managed to get fully into the educational system. In 1959, only 3% of America's population was at green. By 1972, Jacques Derrida was the most frequently quoted academic America. Green had grown to 14% on its way to 23%, and green had taken over the universities. That was a stunningly amazing feat. One stage of growing up had basically taken over the colleges and universities in Western countries, and they were introducing it starting in first grade. It's now worked its way into businesses and corporations, into entertainment and Hollywood, even the military. If you want to read a good book on this, you can try my own called Boomeritis. It goes into all of the details. But the point is, it can obviously be done. Education can be infiltrated. One stage of development can take over essentially the entire education system. The stage that did so, called green, pluralistic, multicultural, was already set to be the next higher stage in growing up, the one right beyond rational, which had ruled Western culture for almost a century. In Gebser's terms, archaic, magic, mythic, rational, pluralistic, integral, it was the pluralistic stage. So it was primed to move into that higher slot of leading cultural edge from the start. But notice that even the next higher stage, the stage that's set to move beyond green pluralistic and take its place as the cultural leading edge, is the integral stage. So if we are ready, we can move in this direction. So what does ready mean? How do we get ready? Well, one is by following many of the moves that green made. After all, they started fairly slowly. One of the things they would do is approach universities and sign up to give courses on their green theories. They, of course, put it in terms such as getting rid of racism, ending inequality, gaining equal rights for all, including diversity, equality, inclusiveness, and so on. The problem is that theories can do none of those things, whereas integral theories can. Because integral meta theory includes the different stages of growing up. These stages and their diversities are all included, and they are all equally included. And consequentially, they are all actually included. Green pluralism can only pick one stage, the multicultural. So it can't really be diverse and include all the real stages that humans possess. Therefore, they can't really have a true equality where everybody's stage is taken into account as they grow. And therefore, they really can't be truly inclusive since they only allow one stage and all others are ridiculed or tossed out of the social club. So the one thing they can't do is deliver on diversity, equality, inclusiveness, which is the one and only big value set they claim they will provide. But the point was that they got universities to allow them to give add-on courses that kids could sign up for and that gave them their foothold in education. Because at the time they started doing this 10 to 20 years ago, what they were saying made a lot of sense to a lot of people, students, teachers, professors, administrators, and they slowly grew from there. After all, who didn't want equality and inclusiveness? But now, some 10 years later, their teachings have become hackneyed, old, boring, and academics are starting to turn on them vigorously. If you read one and only one book demonstrating how the green position has totally fallen apart, I urge you to read Douglas Murray's The War on the West. It brilliantly goes into how that worldview has totally collapsed, as well as how it got ensconced in the universities in the first place. But integral meta theory has it all over green multiculturalism, and it can deliver the items that green cannot. As for diversity, equality, inclusiveness, it delivers diversity in the diversity of worldviews that each stage of growing up produces. And this is a real diversity of viewpoints, not just a diversity of skin color. Moreover, each and every stage of growing up is given a perfectly equal value in the process of growing up. Overall, none are more important than the others. They all have to function fully and equally for growing up to occur at all. And that means that every stage has to be fully included for a healthy growing up. So integral fully covers diversity, equality, and inclusiveness. And it gives people a way out of the stuckness that is green. Right now, people everywhere are stuck with some version of the green, pluralistic, multicultural, intersexual worldview. And they are getting really sick of it. Not only does it not deliver on the values that it promised it would, it actually makes them worse. As for racism, it's simply treating Black people as objects of racism for treating white people as being, every one of them, racist, which is pure racism in itself. As for diversity, it doesn't want diversity of thought, just diversity of skin color, which itself is also racist. It doesn't want equality of opportunity, it wants equality of outcome, where absolutely everybody gets the same stuff, the same economics, the same private goods, the same money, no diversity at all. This is why the integral approach has such a good chance at overcoming green pluralism and taking its place as the cultural leading edge. If green could make those moves in the 70s and 80s and 90s, I know that integral can do so now. So let's get started. You can begin by signing up to teach add-on courses at universities and go from there. Once integral starts to get into universities, the many advantages that integral has over green pluralism will start to jump out, and other teachers, finding integral very attractive, might very well begin to offer courses on it. That's what happened with green, and I see no reason that couldn't start happening with integral. After all, what green got started was its appeal to students and teachers. Its emphasis on diversity, equality, inclusiveness sounded great to all of them. But some 10 to 20 years later, which is how long green has dominated academia, the ideas no longer have much appeal. After all, they were tried and they didn't work. This is where integral can take up the slack. Every time I talk to a dyed-in-the-wool green person and explain the advantages that integral has over green in actually delivering real diversity of thought, not just skin color, and the equal importance of all the stages of growing up, and therefore the general inclusiveness that integral offers, that green person really lights up to the many positives of integral compared to green. At least a half dozen of these folks are now teaching add-on courses at various universities. And that's one of the great ways we can start to get integral into the overall education system. And we all know the attractiveness of the integral viewpoint, the ways it makes sense of the world, as well as the many ways it answers the stuckness that green finds itself in right now. Between green and integral, integral is by far the better choice. And people realize that once they hear both of them. So that is one way that I recommend we can get integral into the education system. Most universities offer some sort of optional add-on courses that can be taught, and we should take advantage of that opportunity. So let's take that first step in getting into the education system, and it should grow from there. Hopefully, one day soon, particularly as green dies, the integral stage, which is, after all, the next higher stage beyond green in the growing up sequence, will step in and take over. And that would be good news for all of us. And as the world becomes more integral, the number of wars will die down. Right now, around the world, there are 47 wars going on. Integral would put an end to that, as it has throughout history. And that would definitely be a very good thing. Thank you very much. This is Ken.
Ken, thank you so much.